Mike. Thank you for joining us here today on this Vegan Plant-Based Summit. How are you?
I'm really good. This is definitely the first thing like this I've ever done, actually. I'm a new vegan, but yeah, feeling great.
A new vegan, that's great. That's what I like to hear. Are you a plant-based vegan or are you a vegan?
So we went plant-based straight away, right? So on Christmas Day, 2019, so just before everything kicked off, we went straight plant-based. So we went through everything in the house and just got rid of everything in terms of food that we could. And since then, it takes a little while before you start sort of realizing, okay, well, what about leather? Okay, well, what about this washing liquid? What about that? I mean, we only found out last week that our toilet roll isn't vegan.
What?
Yeah, no, well, I'm going to blow your mind now. There's actually companies that produce toilet paper, and the binding agent that they use to hold the pulp together is mostly plant-based, but if they can't get plant-based, they use animal products. It literally is everywhere. I should start a blog about this.
Yeah, when you go back to basics, you mainly avoid all of those added animal products that they put in just about everything, including your shampoo. But I never would have thought it was in toilet roll.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, look that one up after the call. It's shocking.
So what made you go vegan and at Christmas?
Well, I suppose Christmas is the time when you have your family around you and you spend time with them, and we're talking about, being healthier. And I mean, I'd already started to lose weight by taking a vegetarian diet. It was very heavy in cheese, though, I have to say. And my partner Nina, she was pretty healthy, but she was a meat eater. And we just sort of decided, I mean, we were just talking about diets and improvements. I had just seen The Game Changers, I have to say, and that kind of just that bit of extra urge that you don't need to eat meat. It's kind of optional. I was reading books by Dr. Michael McGregor, my apologies, and also the China study, which I had read slightly earlier, but had another reread again. And it started to dawn on me that, hey, we really don't need to eat all of this excess, rich products or products that have come from animals or that are animals for that matter. As a vegetarian, it was a big challenge to think, okay, so no eggs, no dairy, no milk. But it only took us a few days to realize we're quite obsessive, really. So we asked all the people we knew that were vegans and said, hey, what can we eat? What can we do? And it didn't take long to realize that actually there's a whole host of ways you can eat. There's so much. There is absolute abundance, actually. Our meals started to become more colorful, and we've literally never looked back.
Now, I just noticed that you said that you were already on your weight loss journey. Tell me a little bit more about that and how the plant-based diet helped you.
Oh, absolutely. In a plant-based diet is the best thing in the world for weight loss. I'd started cycling, and I went to a vegetarian diet, like I said, but I was eating a lot of butter, a lot of dairy. I had spots on my face, and you really shouldn't have that as a man, in your 30s. And moving to a plant-based diet and being more conscious about the sort of things that we eat has given me a hell of a lot more energy. In fact, actually, this is probably the single biggest life hack you could have, is to do a plant-based diet. Thinking about it completely selfishly, by having a well-balanced plant-based diet, you do have to think about it. It's not something you can just sort of do on an impulse. You need to sort of plan a little bit. That's the only downside. But since taking a plant-based diet, my fat percentage has dropped dramatically. Obviously, I'm not taking in any cholesterol at all anymore. And my primary motivation for this was to become fitter and healthier, as fit and healthy as I could possibly be. My cardiovascular system is really important to me. I'm a scuba diver, actually a scuba diving fanatic, really. I spend as much time in the sea as I possibly can. So when I'm not scuba diving, I'm swimming and I'm free diving. So things like lung capacity and how much air you can hold in your lungs, and how much air your body, how much oxygen your body needs, and how much carbon dioxide you produce. Is definitely those are the sort of metrics that I'm looking to improve on, to get longer dives, to get safer dives, and there's been a definite improvement.
Now, as a scuba diver, you must belong to a club of sorts. What sort of people also belong to that club? Are they meat eaters, fish eaters? And how does that impact on your judgment?
That's a really good question, Isabella. I do belong to a dive club, and I dive with several clubs and people that are not even in clubs. And of all of those people, I've dived with over 50 people in 3 years. And although diet isn't something that you would sort of instantly come and talk about, since going vegan, everyone has made a point to tell me that they are not, or they will eat meat or what have you. So generally, it's about 95% meat eaters. Now, the biggest risk factor that you can have when you're diving, the thing that comes out in all the incident reports year after year after year, is being obese, being overweight, divers having heart attacks in the water. Our sport is very safe, but as our diving population gets older and, dare I say, fatter, the risks mount up year after year. So the most important thing you can do is look after your health in terms of looking after your heart, in terms of not eating so much animal products.
So, in terms of the environment, you obviously see what's underneath the water. What changes have you seen?
One of the things we do as divers, and particularly those of us that are attached to the Marine Conservation Society, is we record on a slate the things that we've seen on our dives. One of the things that seems to be quite a disturbing trend is the amount of abandoned fishing gear that we find on our dives. So we find all manner of fishing gear that's abandoned, but all of it falls into a few categories. You've got the pots that have just been lost or left. There's abandoned nets, and there's other abandoned sort of bits of paraphernalia and fishing gear. Now, fishing gear continues to fish even long after it's been abandoned. And because it's all made of plastic nowadays, it continues forever unless somebody sees it and does something about it.
You say it continues to fish long after it's been abandoned. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So a lobster pot's are really good examples of these. So a lobster pot is essentially a small cage about as big as a person, near enough, or you could see two of them. They're about 3 foot long and a couple of feet wide. Now, they're designed in a certain way to allow lobsters and other crustaceans in, but not back out again. Now, the way these are fished is that they're dropped off at certain places where fishermen know exactly where to get them. And then they haul them back up again and see if there's anything inside them. If there isn't, then they drop them back in again or put them somewhere else. Now, the problem is perhaps if their knots aren't good enough, or perhaps if some part of the buoy has perished, these things get lost to the sea. The other thing that happens, which we've seen on the Isle of Man just over the last week, is a number of hobbyists coming out with like toy pots. So there are pots you can buy sort of on eBay and Amazon, that sort of thing. And because they're not actually legal without a license, people just tend to leave them there. So the fishing authorities find them and no one comes forward to collect them. But when you have this fishing gear in the sea, it just continues to catch. So the lobster pots, for example, will catch a lobster, and then the lobster will die, and then another lobster will come in, and then that one will die, and then another one, and so on. It's pretty bad. As divers, we see these regularly.
That's shocking. So originally you became plant-based or a vegan for health reasons. And obviously with your hobbies, diving, cycling, that will have changed, because veganism isn't just about diet, it's about a lifestyle, and that encompasses the environment and animal welfare. Tell me how your views and opinions have changed towards animal welfare and the environment since you became vegan.
Well, a good example would be when I was a vegetarian. You don't want to kill animals, you don't want to eat them. And this is quite a common position to hold. But what you don't understand is that by consuming dairy, you're condemning male calves, for example. By consuming eggs, you're condemning male chicks, which go into horrible things I won't go into right now. But it's really appalling. And when you start interacting, I suppose, with other people in the plant-based or vegan movements, they kind of open your eyes to these things. You can't just take it for one of its pillars. So I sort of came for the health, and I've stayed for the climate, the environment, animal welfare, and so on.
Now, you live in a rural environment, and one of the common misconceptions is that you can't be friends with a farmer if you're a vegan, or you're against farming. Tell me a little bit more about your journey and how this sort of viewpoint has impacted your lifestyle.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. I mean, I don't actually talk to people about being vegan particularly. Perhaps this will change. I've only been a vegan for maybe a year or so, and plant-based for longer than that, not much longer really. But I have noticed this sort of presumption that if you eat plants, then you must be anti-farmer. But obviously, farmers grow plants, so I don't see that. Doesn't compute to me. There are definitely two sides to this. There is the animal agriculture aspect, and then there is the sort of crops for humans side of things as well. And in terms of farming, some farmers straddle both. Like our local farmer, they have animal agriculture, but they also grow crops too for people. And I do see a movement away from animal agriculture. On the Isle of Man, to meet our climate obligations, we do need to reduce considerably the amount of ruminant animals and other animals that we farm. This was a report conducted for Tynwald, our parliament, a few years ago. And in that report, the guy who actually was also a new vegan, but he wasn't, I don't think, when he wrote the report, but it's just facts, really. No one's sort of anti-farmer, it's just a case that, there are some farms that have got appalling welfare standards, and obviously any that are farming animals are doing so unnecessarily, in my opinion.
So from an individual point of view, from a farmer point of view, it's not necessarily the farmer's fault or the farmer's choice. That comes more down to subsidies and farming standards. As an environmentalist, do you have any views and opinions on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of farmers, I was talking to one actually just this afternoon, and we were just talking about how their business, they're kind of forced into a certain way of farming through subsidies, through various regulatory requirements. They sort of end up trapped, if you will, in their certain patterns of behavior. And the way I see things changing as time moves on is to start funding them via biodiversity grants and similar, to encourage them to develop the land that they're on, rather than to just create sort of barren. They call it improved grassland, but it's essentially just a biodiversity desert.
So you mentioned biodiversity. What, in practical terms, does that mean?
So there's a couple of aspects to biodiversity. There's the selfish aspect, in that we need all of the various insects and all of the various little plants in order for us to survive ourselves. We need the insects as pollinators, for example. But then there's biodiversity for biodiversity's sake. The species that go extinct, our local wildlife trust tracks, and there are a notable number of birds. We're looking at the red endangered list, like curlews. They're ground nesting birds, and they nest in essentially farmland. So human activity and sort of impinges on their their own traditional, the curlews have been there for hundreds and hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, and then modern human activity is wiping them out. If not, we haven't seen any for a couple of years. So this is kind of part of the problem. So we don't need the curlews, but they need to be left alone. So we do need to leave space for nature. On our island, on the Isle of Man where we live, we actually have more of our land turned over to farming than anywhere else, and we have less forests than our neighbours too.
So what sort of impact do you think that sort of farming environment has on an island as small as the Isle of Man?
Well, in the short term, it creates biodiversity loss, and in the long term, it creates a culture whereby we see our beautiful hills, not for what they are, but for how they look. Our countryside is considered to be very beautiful. However, we clean up fallen trees. We graze the uplands down to the ground with sheep. And this isn't at all how the island used to be in times gone by. It was a forested environment. So we kind of get used to a certain way of being and go, that must be natural, that must be the way it is. But actually, it's the complete opposite of that. It's a very unnatural environment that we've created as humans. And we continue to do so unnaturally. However, people are, thanks to the likes of David Attenborough, starting to understand that, okay, perhaps things need to be slightly different now. So we are replanting trees, but we're not doing so fast enough. We're certainly not replacing the ones we're losing.
That's true. And a lot of the time, trees are ripped from the ground for animal agriculture. Now, taking the conversation back to diet, how has your example and going vegan, how has that actually influenced the wider community and your family as well?
Oh, it's definitely influenced family. So, I mean, we have 4 vegans in our family now, in our direct family. So our family dinners are usually based around vegan cooking, and everyone enjoys it. We're not talking about depriving ourselves here when we talk about a plant-based diet. It's not the sort of like just a bowl of chickpeas or something. We're talking about some delicious homemade food, like mushroom pates and things, instead of sort of animal derived ones, which people just say they prefer. We use the modern plant-based mayonnaises and things, and we can create some amazing dishes. In terms of influence, so I'm perhaps one of the only vegan divers on the Isle of Man. I do actually know of one other intermittent diver. So it's good for us to be in the communities. We had our diving Christmas party when we had no COVID cases last Christmas. So I had my vegan dish, and of course everyone wants to ask me about it, because I'm not eating the same thing they are. I'm not having the carvery. I'm having this beautiful vegan meal that the chef prepared for me. But again, the chef prepared me a beautiful meal which looked way better than theirs. Everyone was jealous. So everyone wants to talk to me about it. I find that people know that I'm plant-based, and it creates a sort of a conversation. Everyone wants to know. There's this rumor that, how do you know a vegan? Well, they'll tell you. It's exactly the opposite. I find that I'm talking about plant-based and vegan stuff because people are talking to me about it rather than the other way around.
So if you could give the general public or the viewers one little bit of advice on becoming vegan and becoming plant-based, what would it be?
One simple piece of advice. If you're looking to reduce your meat intake, the best thing to do is to look at these meat alternatives that are available from companies like Beyond. If you go to the meat aisle in Tesco's, at the very end there, you'll find meat substitutes that are more or less exactly the same. However, they're better for you, they're lower calorie, and they are no cholesterol, and they're much better for the environment. They use much less energy. Consider swapping out your cow milk, your cow juice, as we call it here, for an oat alternative. Try oat milk. There's some brilliant oat milks out there. You can feel free to try all the others, but just pick up some oat milk in your next shopping and just give it a go. Look up the figures for oat milk versus dairy milk and see the difference. But those are the two things I'd suggest. Replace one meal a week. If you want to not go vegan because you want to eat cheese, well, go on, eat cheese. And your diet will change, and you'll feel better, and then you just won't want it. Trust me.
One of the things that I've found is that when people find out that you're vegan, they bring the conversation around to food rather than you. And the first thing they say is, yeah, but that fake stuff is too expensive. What would you say to them?
Do you know what? If you eat as a vegan, if I was a vegan at university, I would have had a much better time than I did. And that vegan food is really, really cheap. You're talking about your lentils, your rices, your pastas, that sort of stuff is a base. And then adding cut vegetables on top. You can fry them, you can oven bake them, you could do all kinds of stuff. Eating vegan is actually really cheap and incredibly healthy, and you will feel better. That's kind of the key point here. There's no point sort of suffering through a bowl and feeling like it's medicine. A good plant-based meal tastes great and you feel great afterwards. It's unlike the sort of McDonald's effect where you have a McDonald's meal and then you kind of feel sluggish and lethargic afterwards. Well, plant-based diet is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, that's the common theme coming through from everybody that we've interviewed, is that once you change to a plant-based diet, not necessarily a vegan diet, because you can live off Oreos and chips on a vegan diet, but a plant-based diet, then you're going to feel a whole lot better. You're going to be mentally positive, environmentally positive, and just generally healthier.
Absolutely. And, there is this thing called Veganuary where you can go and try sort of going vegan for 30 days in terms of your diet choices. And they help you through it and give you sort of recipe ideas. There's nothing in Veganuary that is expensive. Okay, so don't feel like, hey, I want to do this, but I don't know where. Well, you can start with sort of a vegan community. You can ask people for help, like vegan communities such as this one, absolutely brilliant. But also you can just look up Veganuary, and you don't need to wait for January to do it. They'll send you the 30-day challenge straight away by email, and you'll get your recipe ideas. It all works perfectly in international supermarkets. There's nothing fancy or strange or some weird ingredient that you can't find. It's very easy to do. And once you've done it, I've found that people that have done it just don't go back.
When I'm trying to give people inspiration for what they can actually eat, I refer them to a couple of books, one of them being Dr. Greger's How Not to Diet and his How Not to Die cookbook. And the recipes are just so nice, so simple with limited ingredients. It's not like you're going to have to go out there and actually spend a fortune. And let's face it, it's not all about lettuce. You've got beans on toast, and you've got lentil curry, and you've got bean chili. You've got a variety of things. And life actually becomes more interesting on a plant-based diet.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll also find that a lot of things that you may already eat are already plant-based, or indeed that there's an easy plant-based alternative. So there may just be the one ingredient to switch out or something like that. If you want bacon, there is the processed, Vivera bacon, which you can just be direct swapped out. If you really want to eat something that's sort of analogous to a meat-based meal, Beyond Burger is amazing. Everyone who tries Beyond Burger is great. It is exactly like a meat burger. The only difference is it is slightly more expensive. But there are products out there for everyone. If you're a bit of a cook and you want sort of some nice, easy, but impressive recipes, if you want to impress your dinner guests, then Bosch have got some amazing cookbooks. And in our family, we sometimes take it in turns to make one of the Bosch meals. So the last one we had was the Bosch sweet and sour. Well, it was sweet and sour tofu, but it was kind of like a chicken, kind of pork, kind of Chinese dish. And it's really disappointing that none of the Chinese restaurants, around, can do that. It's so much easier, it's cheaper, it's healthier. There is literally no downside. It's just a mentality thing.
It is. It is a mentality thing, but it's for the general public. It's also knowing what's right and who to trust, because it seems like every week another diet pops up, or every week another lifestyle pops up, and there's that much information out there. It really is a minefield. So who to trust comes down to living a life of doing it and becoming an expert, and then passing the information on.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not wrong about that. So, I do have friends on other diets, but none of them want to be plant-based. They want to do Atkins and eat loads of meat because, it's sort of habitualized, that's what they want to do, or they do keto or what have you. But plant-based ticks a lot of boxes. So if you care about the environment, switching from a normal sort of traditional British diet to a plant-based diet will save you the annual CO2 equivalent of a return flight from London to New York twice every year. So that's in the right ballpark. So if you're interested in environment, then plant-based is a no-brainer. If you're interested in your health, again, there's some amazing plant-based athletes. Various professional sporting teams are trying plant-based diets on their teams to great effect. And what else? I mean, every one of these little things has a plant-based diet. If you care about the fish, if you care about the oceans, then plant-based will remove an awful lot of the concern there. If you take omega fish oil supplements, then switch to omega algae oil supplements, for example. Go straight to the source rather than going through an animal.
You can eat more, and that's what people think. They think that if you're living off plants, then you're going to be eating less, but it's the opposite. I mean, have you ever tried eating 2,000 calories of broccoli? It's not going to happen. But it's quite easy to eat 2,000 calories in a Big Mac, or Big Mac and fries and a milkshake. It's very, very simple and very easy to do when you're processed food based or meat and dairy based. But the plant-based way, I feel, and I don't know how you feel, is a way to actually eat more and maybe lose more weight and also be healthier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a plant-based diet is good for diabetes. A plant-based diet is good for fat loss and weight loss. The biggest killers in our Western societies are killers that can be avoided with, or indeed partially or completely reversed by a plant-based diet, depending on how far gone you are. But it's fundamentally the right thing to do. If we all switch to a plant-based diet, we might have a possibility of averting the climate crisis. Animal agriculture is responsible for a not insignificant proportion of the damage to the earth. The deforestation in the Amazon, unfortunately, has caused the Amazon rainforest to now be a net emitter of carbon rather than the world's second biggest carbon sink, the first being the oceans. So yeah, I mean, we need to reverse this. But you'll often hear, if you're a new vegan, you'll be inundated by friends and family sending you articles, why it's bad for you, or why, soy, is the worst thing ever. I mean, the Amazon rainforest is actually being felled for soy production, and obviously soy is what vegans eat, but it's actually what the cows eat. So one of the things my friends used to like sending me on social media is that, I eat a lot of soy products, and therefore I'm contributing to the deforestation of the Amazon. Well, that's completely not true. The vast majority of the soy production is done to feed cattle. And in fact, the soy production in Brazil, a lot of that goes to British cattle. So if you're indeed eating British meat, then you are indeed contributing to the deforestation of the Amazon. That's just the way it is. It's terrible.
And it doesn't make sense to feed 70% of the soya that's grown globally to cattle when 11% of the world's population go without food daily.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complete crime. I mean, indeed, we actually overproduce the food that we need, and most of it well, not most of it, but huge quantities of it are wasted. So, plant-based is so much cleaner. The other thing is, most areas around the world can actually grow their own plant-based food locally. Here on the Isle of Man, actually just a few fields away, we have quinoa growing, believe it or not. So we have a local supplier of Isle of Man quinoa, which is an amazingly healthy protein. So we can switch. Most of the Western world can grow oats. So it's an easy, simple switch that anyone can do.
I think we're back to not actually understanding the implications of not changing over. This summit is about trying to feed people the right information to make them and their families healthy, to protect the environment, and to liberate animals from the cruelty that goes on. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
I wish you all the best in everything that you're doing.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Isabel. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome.